Hello, this video is going to be my first one covering the ACT reading comprehension section, giving you a quick intro into what to expect and a rough idea of what our strategy is going to be to tackle it and how we like to prepare for it. One very important thing I'd like to point out right up front, this is a very tough section. Unlike English or math where they're trying to test a specific set of rules or problems to see if you know how to solve them, these are going to be much more about experience and practice to figure out how do I handle this part of the ACT, how do I get the timing down. So it's going to take a little bit more work, be patient. It's going to be a little hard up front, but you can get there. As always, if you find this video helpful, you can help me out by leaving a like and subscribing if you want notifications about future videos that I might post later on. So let's get started. Quickly though, before I get into anything that is on reading comp, important things to understand that I just kind of alluded to. Reading comp is more about experience than any knowledge coming into it. They're not trying to test, do you know your punctuation rules? Do you know how to count to whatever? They don't care about can you do math? They want to know, can you figure these things out in this time limit? And the only way you can get there is through experience and practice. The other big difference is this is the only section where they are actively going to try and trick you with trap answers that seem right, but they're wrong. In the English section, you normally don't run into these. There might be hard questions, but if you know the rules, you should be okay. Reading comprehension, there are no rules they're trying to test, so instead, they're going to see if you're paying attention and if they can trick you into going with a wrong answer. So watch out for those. There's going to be two primary concerns that we're worried about with this section. First is time management. That's the big one. It's really hard, especially when you're starting out. Most people do not finish this section on time. It takes plenty of practice where you're specifically looking at how can I maybe go faster, and certainly more practice and just getting used to it and more comfortable with the section will help, but you're normally going to have to specifically tailor your approach to get your time down and finish on time. The other is those trap answers I was talking about, learning how to identify them so you don't fall for them. For a lot of my students, obviously everybody's different and has different challenges, but for a lot of them, finishing this section on time is the hardest part of the ACT. Whenever I go between should we do SAT or ACT, ACT in my opinion has the most advantages, but this is the one thing that makes it hard, is this time limit on the reading comp. So don't be discouraged if you've got some work to do here and need to play some catch up to be able to finish on time. That's where most people are. It's going to take practice. The other thing that's tough is that the strategies to get there, they vary greatly from person to person. So I'm going to help out as much as I can on this video. Obviously, it's no replacement for an actual in-person tutor that can help you tailor your approach to your specific needs and what you're good at, what your weaknesses are. I'll just do the best I can to give an overall guide, an overall strategy that for most people can work, and some tips on things that you can try adjusting that have worked pretty well for most of my students. So how are we going to prepare? Again, practice is key. You have to actually take these tests. You can't just look up the rules, look up the pacing, and get an idea of what it's about. You have to actually do them to be able to finish on time. So look up some practice tests or some old tests online. You can get a book. They've got study guides. You can go to the ACT's website. They'll have practice tests. You can go to their online test and they'll have practice tests. Do that. Take them so that way you can actually get this pacing down and get the experience you need to succeed in this section. And when you do practice this, don't just focus on accuracy, which might feel weird, but timing is just as important as getting the question right, because that is very hard to do, just finish it on time. In fact, that timing may be even more important than accuracy, because if you don't finish on time and don't even get to the entire last passage, that's 10 questions you automatically miss. So if you go a little faster, that makes you miss a couple more in the first 3 passages, but then you get an entire extra 10 questions in, you might be better off being a little less accurate, but actually getting things done on time. And finding that balance that works for you specifically is key. And again, you can't figure out where that balance is and try to work that in without practice. And every time you do get your practice in and you're going to go take it again, decide what are you going to try and change? Or what are you going to work on to improve? Don't just say, all right, I didn't do too well that time, or I was too slow, I need to try again, maybe I'll be faster. Think specifically, what can you do to try and be faster or be more accurate? What was tripping you up? What part was taking you too long? Any specific type of question? And you can try a new strategy, and I'll go into all these types of strategies for each section in another video, but you really want to come up with, what am I going to try and change? And remind yourself before you take it next time, write them down and read what you wrote down right before you take the next one. Here's what I'm going to try this time. And that's how you'll make the fastest improvement. Adjust your approach to practice as you improve. If we know what we want to work on, we can decide what we want to do, and you might have to change your strategy a little bit as you go. Again, keep trying something new each time, and you'll get there. We're going to go into all these different ways to try and improve your pacing, how to approach each passage in a separate video. So what should you expect to see in this reading comprehension section? There's going to be 4 passages. Each one is going to have roughly 1 page of text as a small little essay, and then 10 questions. One of those passages, so it's not a total of 5, but one of those 4 is going to be a double passage, which actually has 2 smaller essays in it, or small passages. It's still going to have 10 questions, but some of them are going to be about the first, some of them are going to be at the second, and then some are going to ask about the similarities and differences. So it's one extra thing you have to consider when you're reading those. These double passages for some are easier, for others are harder. So they will take a little bit of practice to get used to and learn how to handle them in particular. You're going to have a total of 40 questions if you didn't do the math already up here. And the time you're going to have is 35 minutes. And you can see right away why timing is so challenging. Because I already have fewer minutes than I have questions, and I have to read 4 essays to do it. And so you can do it, but just keep in mind, it's going to be hard. So make sure you get your practice in. There are several different types of questions. I've tried to lump them into 3 main types that are most helpful so you can have an idea of what you're getting into. There's going to be some main idea, big picture questions. These are normally early on within each passage. There's asking about, what was this whole essay about? What was primarily talking about? For those, make sure your answer applies to the majority, if not all, of the passage, not just some small little part of it. There will be inference questions. Luckily, there's not a ton of those on the ACT, but they are on there, where you might have to read between the lines a little bit, figure out based on the tone or what they were saying, what would most likely happen in this section? What would the author be most likely to do in this situation? So it's not going to have the answer specifically stated in the passage. Now, luckily on the ACT, they're going to normally give you something pretty close, so you don't have to make too much of an inference or read into it too much. SAT is a lot harder for that. The other type that you're going to see a lot on the ACT, almost none on an SAT, are specific detail questions, where it's just going to ask, what did it say in the passage? You just have to go find it. What color was this thing? Where was he when he did this? If you can find it, what does this object do? If you can find it in the passage, you'll have the answer. It's that simple. Just have to be careful with the time, because obviously you don't have a lot of time. If you can't find it, it's really easy to waste a lot of time looking for it, so you got to watch out. And you're going to have to learn a new strategy, and how can I maybe track these down, or figure out, I don't know where this is, maybe I just need to guess and move on. That's where practice is going to come in. So our strategy for this, and again, this is just going to give you a rough idea of our approach. I'll have another video that's going to go more specifically in how we're going to do each passage. But you're going to have 8.5 minutes to 9 minutes per passage. You want to spend less than half of that reading, and then the rest of that on the questions. You don't want to spend more than half on reading, because then you're going to have a very little time to answer your questions. Another very big thing that a lot of people come in thinking, I'm going to do this, it'll help me know what I'm going to look for while I'm reading and save time. Don't do this. Do not read the questions first. That is what we'll do for the SAT, because you have a lot more time there in their reading comprehension. They have a lot harder questions, so you need to know what you're looking for. But on the ACT, the questions are a lot more straightforward, as long as you don't fall for traps. And it's a lot of just find it in the passage. You do not have time to read the questions first. If you do that, you're going to already eat up a lot of your time before you even start reading anything. So this breaks down to taking about 3 to 4 minutes to actually read the passage before you get to the questions, if at all possible. Depending on how quickly you read, because everybody's different here, this can be pretty challenging for a lot of people. And you might have to work on reading speed. That doesn't mean you can suddenly go in and become the fastest reader in the world. You can't really do that. So what that means for most people, you're going to have to aim to read a little faster than you're comfortable with. Probably not going to be able to sit there and read at a leisurely pace where you're actually understanding every little thing. You might have to be a little bit more brisk where you're not completely grasping everything that's happening. Just keep in mind your primary goal here isn't to understand everything, but to have an idea of the main idea and to know where stuff is located. So when I have a question about it, I know where to go and find the answer. You don't need to be able to answer the questions from memory. Do not reread a paragraph or lines as you're reading it. It's very tempting, especially under the stress when you're trying to read faster. You're often going to maybe get a couple lines in or through a paragraph and realize I have no idea what I just read and think I have to go back and reread this. Otherwise, how am I supposed to know? Don't do that. You don't have time. You're better off just refocusing and keep going on the next ones. And then if you have a question that doesn't sound like it's about anything you've read, then you know it's probably in that part where I zoned out or I wasn't understanding. Then you can go reread that part only if you have to. Always try and go back to the passage when you're answering your questions and find support for your answer, assuming you have time. Because the ACT's questions don't have a lot of hard inference questions going on, a lot of stuff is either expressly stated in the passage or has something to really tell you it's probably this answer. If you can go back and find it, you're going to be way more accurate. And you'll avoid the common mistake of, oh yeah, I remember, it was this. And then as soon as you can go back and point it out, you'll realize I was wrong. I can't tell you how many times I ran into that situation with my students, especially early on, where they'd miss these questions and be like, well, how did I miss this? I know it was that. I read that specifically. And I'd go tell them, all right, go point out where it was. Like, I can tell you exactly where it was. They'll flip it back, and in 5 seconds, they'll find the exact sentence and be like, oh, never mind. It said this. It's like if you took those 5 seconds because you already knew where it was, you would have caught that. So try and go back to find support for your answer if you have time. Again, pacing is difficult, so you have to find that balance. If you're not sure where something is, do not dwell on any one question and take forever trying to find it. You might be better off at that point eliminating answers that you can, guessing, and moving on. The first question or two, those are usually going to be those big picture main idea questions I was talking about. For them, make sure that your answer applies to the whole passage, the majority of the passage, not some small little part of it. That's often a trap answer they're going to include for those. So how will we practice for this? This will be our last slide for this video. First, we're going to start by doing one passage at a time. Don't just go in and think, I'm going to do an entire reading comprehension here and try to get this done in the 35 minutes. Break it up. Just do one passage. Try and get that done in 8.5 minutes to 9 minutes. You probably won't be able to. Hey, maybe you can, but a lot of people can't. So after one, you can try and figure out, okay, I'm going to try and improve this, work on this, and you can go to the next and try and improve with each one. But what happens if you try and do the entire section with all of 4 passages on time? You're going to end up practicing bad habits where you're going to be too slow on the first 3. And maybe after the first 2, you're going to realize, oh no, I'm way behind. And you're going to rush those last 2 and practice really bad habits of how do I go insanely fast and do this wrong. For the last 2, and you're just wasting that practice. You don't want to do that. Just do one at a time until you can get closer to this 8.5 to 9 minutes per passage. Once you've got the individual passage timing down, or at least close, then you can start doing the entire section in one sitting, aiming for 35 minutes. Then you can start practicing more of the strategies that go along with, okay, if I am falling behind, maybe now I can start implementing some of these other little strategies, a skip strategy that I'll go into later to speed up the last few, or maybe you can realize I'm a little ahead so I can slow down some, or maybe if you do finish ahead of time, you can know, all right, now I can go back and look for whatever questions I maybe skipped earlier. Then finally, once you've got that down, try printing out the ACT bubble sheet if you're going to be taking it in person with paper and pencil. Obviously, if you take it online, you're just clicking buttons. That's not going to be a separate thing. But if you're going to try and take this in person with the paper test, try printing out a bubble sheet. You can get plenty of those online and time yourself after bubbling in your answers. You might think, well, that's just going to take a second, but that often pushes people so that where they were just barely finishing on time, now they're not. So just practicing that little bit can help. I usually recommend you go passage by passage, so you circle each answer for those 10 questions, and then you go bubble in those 10. Then go do the next passage. Circle the 10, bubble those in, move to the next passage. Don't just circle all of them for the entire passage and then plan on going back at the very end and bubbling them all in, because you might run out of time and not have a chance to bubble in your answers. And finally, if you are planning to take it online instead of the paper test, go to TestNav. You can go to their website, and you can use their practice tests to get used to that software. Because when I talk about annotating, where I'm going to underline things, highlight things, you can't really highlight if you have paper, but you can underline, bracket more easily. Get used to the software. How does that work? How can I use their highlighting tools? And you can get the timing down there. And that's going to be it for our intro. So you have a rough idea of how we're going to get ready for this. In my next video, I'll go into the strategy of how to approach each individual passage. And then after that one, I'll have a video on tricks we can use to try and bring your timing down to get that pacing under control. Good luck, and I'll see you on the next one.